2. Philippians 2 will be our opening reading, and we'll start at verse 1. Starting at verse 1. Therefore, if there is any encouragement in Christ, if there is any consolation of love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfish or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourself. Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. Have this attitude in yourself, which is also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of man. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, and those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So then, my beloved, just you've always obeyed as not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Keep your ribbon there. We will be referring back to bits and pieces of this text as we go through the lesson. We're going to talk about grasping after the mist and having the mind of Christ, because the paradox of Christ is he had it all, and he did have it all, and he gave it up. He willingly gave it up, and we'll be emphasizing that willingness on his part multiple times throughout the lesson. He chose absolute, complete surrender in the fullest, most complete way you can even imagine. I don't know, now maybe you can, but I don't know how to imagine a self-surrender more complete than what he did, leaving a heaven, which I can't even understand yet, and coming down to this earth that was more primitive than when you and I go camping, and then giving himself up to the ultimate humiliating death, the death of the cross. And yet he willingly chose all of that. So our question is, what would it look like if we stopped clinging to our own way? And we all have our own way, and not everything that is your way is the wrong way. But if it starts conflicting with God's will, now we got an issue. If we could totally give up everything so everything was dominated by God's will, what would that look like in our life? And what if the call of Christ is not to climb higher, but to bow lower? And it is definitely a call to bow lower. We won't be emphasizing that as much, but it's absolutely in the lesson. And then what if Jesus measured us by what we surrendered, what we gave up? And I think there's a lot to be said there. So we're going to step into the mystery of letting go, and we're going to let Philippians 2, 1 through 12 be our basic text for the lesson. Of course, we will look at some other verses, because we always look at other verses, right? So number one, Christ did not cling to privilege, which I think is kind of neat, because they're in this just current time and our culture and the mentality, there are a lot of people that want to be clinging to privilege and claiming privilege and think they're entitled to a whole lot of stuff. And here is Christ, who did have the ultimate privilege we can imagine, and he was, by being means of deity, entitled to it. And verse 6 tells us, although he existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. And verse 7 goes on to tell us, he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant. Wow. Can you imagine what would happen to our American culture if that mentality was more and more popular, especially among people who claim to be serving our national interests? That'd sure change things, wouldn't it? So he set all of his comforts aside, and this is hard to imagine, because what's heaven like? I mean, we look at the passage in Revelations, there's no sickness, no death, no sorrow, and things like that. We go, man, it must be awesome. Well, Christ was there. He was in the middle of that. So part of the Godhead, eternal deity, and he said, I'll step out of that. I'll step out of that for a while. And he did it for roughly 33 years. And we sometimes may a little bit minimize, oh, that was just 33 years. Well, I'm 60-something years old, or I'm 70-something years old. No, come on. 33 years was a long time to be out of comfort. Now, I'm going to tell a little story on Roy Harrison. Roy Harrison said when he was a kid, they lived up around Cabot, Arkansas. He told his mama once that that was one of the best times I remember. She said, son, we about starved to death. The reason Roy was so happy was he did not know better. And so he had a happy time in hard times. My point here is Christ knew better. He had been in heaven. He knew what all of that was like. It wasn't like he didn't know what he was missing, because if you don't know what you're missing, it's not that big of a deal. And yet he set all of those comforts aside and stepped into this for 33 years approximately. And my other analogy there is, if you don't think 33 years is a long time, get on the back of a bull and try to hang on for 8 seconds. And you'll find out that 33 years is, it was a long time. So he knew who he was. He knew where he came from. He knew where he was going. There was total confidence in that. But he didn't have to prove it by having people applaud him and set him on a pedestal and gather around and, just uphold him in that really ego-lifting sort of way. In fact, John 13:4, I'm not going to turn there, but that's where he kneeled and washed the disciples' feet. And that was so out of place. You remember what Peter did? Peter rejected it first. Of course, Peter, we call him impetuous Peter sometimes. So then he went to the other extreme. Well, not just my feet. Give me a bath from my head to my toes. He did one from one to the other. Not touched me to wash me all over. And, Christ had to kind of reel him in there, which is fine. Matthew 20:28, that's where he said the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And it just occurs to me now, I should have put Acts 20:35 up there, where he said it's more blessed to give than receive. And the few people that figure that out are the ones who live the more blessed life. Now, other people survive and they do okay. But the ones who figure out that it is truly more blessed to be on the giving side than the receiving side, those are the ones that really do live the blessed life. So we have to ask in our development, as we're always praying, help me be a better Christian today than I was yesterday. Wonderful prayer. Keep praying that prayer. What am I clinging to? If God were to send an angel into my life and say, look, partner, you're doing pretty good here. Heaven's pretty impressed with you. But what would follow the but? Now, that would be different for all of us, I'm sure. But unless you're saying you're 100% totally perfect, completely developed in every way you could possibly ever develop, and there's no higher you can go, then there would be a but. Now, wouldn't that be neat? If we could do that, if we could just get a verified text from heaven that said, look, you're doing really good in these 10 points. Now I want you to work on the 11th one. And then you go, okay, there's my next lesson. That would be awesome. So what are we clinging to? What do we hold to? What do we not quite want to let go of yet? Because I don't know if I want to let go of that. Emptying ourselves can be the doorway to something much higher and much better. And it's a little bit odd, because a lot of times we will not see it until we've been forced to see it, or it's too late and then we wish we had the opportunity again. It's just, relying on our wisdom versus God's wisdom. And as one person would say, and I totally agree with it, you cannot fill us until we empty ourselves of us. And I know that may sound a little paradoxical in a way, or a little mystical, but that's the way it is. If I'm full of myself, God cannot fill me. There's no room for God. So I have to empty me of me to make room for God. And that's exactly what Jesus did. That's what we're trying to learn to do in our Christian discipline. One of the things that we do, that's not a mistake, it's just that we get it lopsided. We get so caught up in wanting to explain why everybody else is wrong, and we do need sound doctrine, and we do need to be able to defend that sound doctrine. But that's only one part of the Christian practice. The other part is I discipline my body and I bring my thoughts into captivity, and I learn more and more to imitate Christ and his surrender. And just because I can tell you why I disagree with somebody else's doctrine does not mean I'm making that personal surrender in my life. In fact, I think we all know folks who can argue their position until they're blue in the face, but there are places in their life that are so rotten they haven't really begun in Christianity. Don't make that particular mistake. So Christ emptied himself willingly. So we look back at verse 7 again. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by being obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And nobody had to force him to do that. That's what love does. So if you'll tie that in with John chapter 1, I can't give you the exact verse off my head, but just start reading there in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And you read on down a little further, and it says there was nothing that was made that was not made without him. And so he is our creator. Or as Paul would say in Acts 17, down around verse 26 through 28, we are his offspring. Now let that soak in a minute, because we're his creation. We're his children. And he was willing to empty himself to save us. And you know stories of good parents who would do the exact same thing. They would die for the benefit of their kids. And you may even know stories of where it's happened, where parents died for their kids, or they spent themselves in some way or another for their children. And they do it willingly. Nobody has to tell them to do it. They just do it. Why? Because that depth of love compels them. And that's really what we're looking for. We're really looking for, if you want to get to the core of it, is where we can get to that place in our own heart where we are compelled by our own love to present our bodies a living sacrifice. So our Creator stepped into creation not to walk around and parade around and go, look at me, I'm the one who made you. I'm so great, I'm so good, I'm so powerful, I'm the boss of you. He came and he kneeled and he washed dirty feet. And he dealt with a segment of society that most people would kick to the curb and not want to mess with because they were not the elites, they were not the wealthy, they were not the intelligent. They were the common old working class people who got their hands dirty and probably didn't take a bath but once a week. You know what I'm saying? And he came and he served those people. So he wasn't a distant spectator. He was really, really involved. He knew what was going on. He understood how it was. And he began where? Nazareth, a place so despised, nobody thought anything good could come out of it. And yet he freely chose that path. And that's the thing. We have a proper place for the hellfire and brimstone sermons. I try to do about one a year. And I think, we need to be reminded that there are consequences to our action. But that's really not what's going to inspire the love that we're looking at. Let's put it back on a very, very simple level. Let's take a young man and he's looking for a woman to be his bride, to share his life with for the rest of their years to come. He really doesn't want to have to go up to a woman and go, look, if you don't marry me, I'm going to burn you at the stake. I'm going to give you a slow, miserable, horrible death. And, of course, she's going to relent and go, okay, I'll marry you. It's a lot better than burning at the stake. No, that's not the relationship we want. We want a relationship because he or she wants to be in the relationship with us, and they freely give themselves to be in that relationship. And then in that, we're going to grow together. We freely choose the path. This is the beauty of what Christ did. He set up in heaven in comfort and glory and whatever all heaven is. And he said, I'll step into that for them. And it was his love that compelled. And then he fed on that obedience. John 4:34, you can turn there if you want. That's the woman at the well. And he sent the disciples away to get some food. And they came back and he's not hungry anymore. And they're like, who fed him? And he said, my meat, or my food, is to do the will of my Father in heaven. That gave him sustenance. That's the willingness, the desire, the enthusiasm, the eagerness. So the Spirit's going to shape us through our humble obedience, and He does. We surrender, we follow the instruction, we have it listed out, we call it the Bible. And as we do that, we learn and we grow and we develop. Sometimes we have to contemplate, we got to look at ourselves pretty close, but our surrender makes us an echo of His life. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm not here just to tell you why I think the Catholic Church is wrong. Now, we could do a lot of lessons on that, and I have a lot of ideas about that. And I think you would agree with me quite heartily. It'd be kind of like preaching to the choir. But we're also here to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's Romans 8 and verse 29. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to become conformed to the image of His Son, so that He would be the firstborn among many brethren. And so, this isn't just about being wowed about Christ, though that is impressive. It's about, okay, how can I imitate that? And what does that look like in my life? Where are you at in life? Because it's going to look different where you're at. You know, you're young and that your life's all opening up and everything's still on the table and you're not sure where it's going. You still want this attitude, but it's going to look different than those of us who are well into the third, fourth quarter. Some of us maybe in the overtime, and life's playing out and we're coming to our due end. And so that's another little thing that you would just really have to sit down and get some personal counsel on for your particular place. So Christ chose that humility over honor, all the honor in heaven. He just simply humbled Himself. He wasn't forced or manipulated. And again, that's not what we want to do. Let me parse that out just a little bit, okay? Fathers, raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So there is a time for a dad to say, get your clothes on, we're going to church. Put your phone up, it's time for evening Bible study. However dad wants to do it. There's a time for dad to say, in my house, it's my rules, right? And so when they're under your authority and they're in the rearing years, there's going to be some of that going on where you're going to make your children do some things they don't necessarily want to do, just like you make them do their homework, brush their teeth, take a bath, clean their room, and other things. We're teaching them responsibility. But then there comes a point where they reach maturity. And now they have to step off of mom and dad's authority into their own faith. And they have to follow Jesus because they want to follow Jesus. And they want to be conformed to the image. And that's what we're looking at. So a little distinction there, because I don't want to give any parents the wrong idea that you can't boss your kids around. I've heard parents say, well, I don't tell my kids what to believe. They got to figure that out for their own. No. Man. I don't tell my kids what to think about alcohol. They got to figure that out for their own. Who would say such a crazy thing? I don't tell my kids what to think about stealing. They got to figure that out for their own. No, again, you don't do that. And when it comes to spiritual matters, and you're raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, you don't leave them on their own. They'll get on their own soon enough, and then you'll do a lot of praying. So Jesus shows the path that most people reject, this humility over honor. We're in a society now, especially with all our social media, and you know me, I'm not against social media, but there's so many people chasing likes and, followers and all of that stuff. They are looking to be honored, which is rather humorous if you ask me, but nonetheless, there are people that go after it. Isaiah 53 and 3, let's go back and read that one. This is clearly a prophetic text. I think I also want verse 4 on that. Isaiah 53. And 3. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and like one who from men hid their face. He was despised and we did not. He was despised and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs himself he bore, our sorrows he carried. Yet ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And it goes on to talk about being pierced through and what have you there. So humility is the gateway to obedience. And even with Christ, that is true. Let me see if I can find this off the top of my head. I'm going to Hebrews 5, and I think I want verse 8. I do. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through the things which he suffered. And then it goes on to say, having been perfected, became the author of salvation to all who obey him. So we clothe ourselves with humility. That is the example Christ is setting for us. And James 4:10 says, humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. And as we get a little further into our Philippians text, we see that's exactly what happened with Christ as we close that text out in just a moment. So he chose serving over being served. He assumed the posture of a servant. And again, we've got to clarify that just a tad, because a lot of us think, oh no, you're not taking advantage of me. I ain't letting nobody manipulate me. And we get a little defensive and put up our borders when we start talking about serving. But Christ was the ultimate servant. Now, how many of us would call him spineless, weak, Casper milquetoast? That's an old saying, isn't it? Casper milquetoast. That's going way back. This is kind of funny. So when we look at Christ as the ultimate servant, we're like, wow. And we honor that. And then when we think of serving, all of a sudden the defenses go up. You're not getting my stuff. You're not getting my time. You're not getting my. It's a little hard to get the biblical mentality there. So he steps fully into the human condition, and I mean fully into the human condition, and he didn't avoid those that were undesirable. He ministered to them. I mean, the Pharisees were so the opposite. They wouldn't get near somebody who they thought was immoral. Remember when the prostitute was washing Jesus' feet with her tears and drying with her hair, and the Pharisee goes, well, obviously he's not a prophet. He doesn't know what kind of woman this is. And that's the humility that he came, and those are the people he came to serve. Why? Because the woman at the well who had been married multiple times, guess what? She was his offspring also. He, the creator of all, created her too. And he didn't want to lose that one either. It's a hard thing to get your head around sometimes. So his service wasn't just, an act here and there. It was the heartbeat of his life. It was the character thing that characterized his life. There are people that do good deeds. I'm of the opinion that everybody does some good deeds now and then. And around Christmas time, if you're in Little Rock at the right time, you'll see Toy Hill. I've mentioned this before. And Toy Hill is the Marines collecting toys for children, which I think is a good thing. And anybody who wants to take a toy there can do it. And if you want to do it, look it up on the internet. You can do it. And in the midst of all those people who do that, there'll be a motorcycle gang. Some scruffy, hard-looking, bad-looking dudes. And they probably are. I wouldn't mess with them. But they're doing a good deed. And it's a little kind of interesting because, they got their big old Harleys and everything. And then they got a big old teddy bear on the front that they're donating to the kids. I think everybody does some good deeds. It's not, can I go, look, I did a good deed. I did 3 good deeds this year. Back in January, I did this. In July, I did that. And in November, I did that. Anybody can do that. But is it the heartbeat of our life? Is our life characterized by doing good deeds? When people think about us, do they think of somebody who goes about doing good? What's the first thing that comes to people's mind when they think of you? Now, you're not totally responsible for that. You can't always control that, but it's an interesting place to start a little bit and go, I wonder what they do think of. Even on the cross, he thought of others. So what did he talk about the thief on the cross? Today you'll be with me in paradise. He's on the cross and he's thinking about other people. And then also as he's dying, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. That's that heart of service that is so deep that not even the time of your death can stop you from thinking of other people. And then you find a freedom in that the crowd are never going to taste. It's just a place that I guess you got to be there to understand it. So you have a life that serves, that shines most like Christ. Let's get this last one in. He fully trusted the Father. He said, not my will, but thine be done. See, that's one of the problems we run into. We look at that path of service and go, I don't know. Well, it looks like it might be a little rough. I don't think I will. Well, the straight and narrow way always looks rough. Taking up your cross and following Him always looks rough. So full surrender is going to come from absolute full trust. That's the tricky part. Agreed. But you trust Him fully. You got to be like Job. Even though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. And so as you look at Christ, most of us agree that He was roughly 33 and a half years old when He died. That's dying pretty young, isn't it? As I scan around the auditorium, there are not too many people in here right now that can look at 33 and go, that's kind of old, isn't it? Most of us are looking at 33 like, that's just a baby. Bless their heart, they'll grow up. But Christ gave His life up then. Now, if He was willing to do it then what about us when we hit 60s and 70s and 80s? How much more, what are we hanging on to as we get that far down the road? So 1 Peter 2:23, it tells us that He was entrusting Himself to God. And you might want to open that up and look at fuller context. It's easy to trust when everything's going the way I want it to go. Amen? That's really easy. The hard thing to do is when it's not going the way I go. And what if I do have to be like Job and go, even though He slay me, yet will I trust Him? And when Job said that, he didn't know the end of the story yet. This is another place we mess up. Well, yeah, but look at Job. He got everything back and he got more than he ever had. It worked out great for him. Sure, I'd lose all my kids and all my stuff and everything I ever had if I knew I was going to get 15 times more 5 years later. No, you wouldn't. Don't give me that nonsense. You'd sit in a pile of ashes with a piece of broken pottery and scrape yourself and cry and moan just like Job did. And yet, in his pain, he said, even though he slay me, yet will I trust Him. That's where we want to get. So humble trust, that's the way up. Let's go back to our Ephesians text, verse 9. For this reason also God highly exalted Him and bestowed on Him a name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, and those who are in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. That's learning to bear the image of the Son. Emptying ourselves, trusting that God knows a whole lot better. And He does. One last comment. We'll get to our last slide. And part of our problem is we don't think eternal. This little life here, this 90 years we're going to get, 150, whatever it is you get, it's just a blip. And then we got all eternity. The problem with us is our thinking stops too much at the tombstone. And we don't understand it's an eternal journey. And it's eternal for better or worse. So Philippians 2 is not just a mere moment in Jesus' life. That was the way He lived His life. As we said earlier, that was the heartbeat of His life. When we empty ourselves of ourselves, then we start opening up to God in ways that we can't if we're full of ourselves. And it is the pathway upward. It worked for Christ, didn't it? Totally emptied Himself. And God exalted Him. When did God exalt Him? After the emptying. After the total emptying on Calvary. On the other side of the tombstone came the exalting. So will we choose to follow Christ and His image? Will we choose it when it costs us our comfort? Will we kneel in service when self wants more? Self wants more self. Will we trust God above our own will? It's easy to sit and say yes. In practice, it's a whole other ballgame, isn't it? Last slide. God will never waste what you lay down. Not one act of humility, not one moment of obedience, not one quiet surrender will ever be forgotten by the Father. The question that remains is, are we still seeking to imitate the depth of the humility of Christ? If you are, stay the course. If not, your change may be private. Let us help you if we can.